Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of Singapore's education sector today, International Education Market Updates, Trends, and Developments. My name is Kate. I am the Manager of Market Support and Partnership Development here at the BC Council for International Education. And thank you so much for joining us today on what I hope would be an informative session regarding the international education profile in Singapore. Before we get started, it is important that I acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Just quickly, some Zoom logistics. This webinar, we will have Dan joining us and also answer the questions that we have received earlier. Many of you have submitted your questions on the Zoom registration form, so we have forwarded that questions to Dan, so he's going to address them during this session. If you have any live questions, please feel free to put that in the chat box or use the Q&A function so that we can help to address the questions. Or if you have anything just in general, you can also let myself know, or my colleague Morgan is also on this webinar, so we will help you with that. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Dan Berard, First Secretary and Trade Commissioner from the High Commission of Canada to Singapore. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks so much, and good evening to you all. Thanks for staying late. As mentioned, I'm a Trade Commissioner here at the High Commission of Canada to Singapore, and I cover the education sector. So that ranges pretty widely. It goes from traditional student recruitment for Canadian colleges and universities to even helping forward some academic partnerships as needed or as required by Canadian universities who are interested in working with their Singaporean counterparts. And then even getting into some educational technologies. We have some great Canadian startups and companies that have education technology systems. Some are old established brands like Smart Technologies who make those smart boards out of Alberta. But there's also up and coming ones who are doing helping teachers use AI to develop lesson plans. So the whole gamut. But you're here to learn about Singapore, and so I think I'll just maybe give the 30,000-foot overview and talk about the education system, and then we can answer some of the questions that you guys sent in. So the Singaporean education system, the local schools are usually attended by Singapore nationals and some permanent residents. It's very difficult for foreigners to get into the local school system. English is the first language learned by almost half all the children by the time they reach preschool, and then it becomes the primary medium of instruction by the time they reach primary school, which is at 7 years old. The preferred programs of study for post-secondary education in Singapore are engineering, business and services, and then electronics and information communications technology. The Singapore secondary system uses the British system, so with the A levels and the O levels and all that. So if you look at it from the beginning to the start, so you can classify into several stages. Preschool, that's optional. It's run by the private sector, although there's increasingly government preschools popping up. It's equivalent, I guess, of a combination of our nurseries, our preschools, and our kindergartens. And as I mentioned, primary school starts at the age of 7 and goes for 6 years. And then secondary is usually completed in 4 to 5 years. And then they go on to pre-university where they have the choice, to go to junior college, which is your A levels, and then on to university, or to polytechnics or other type of schools such as Singapore sports schools, schools of the art, etc. If they're male, they have to do 2 years of national service. So typically they'll apply to their local universities once they finish their A levels and then they go into national service for 2 years and then join university. And the same applies for when they go abroad. I mean, for exceptional scholars, they could go straight abroad, but usually, people want to do the national service with their friends, and at that young age, when they're 17, it's better to get it out of the way and done, because the obligation never goes away. The education system itself, the Singapore's education system has been consistently ranked as one of the highest in the world by the OECD. And according to PISA, the Worldwide Study in Educational Systems, Singapore has one of the highest performances in international educations and always consistently tops the global rankings. And even their universities are ranked among the best in Asia and the world. I think National University of Singapore, last I saw, was 8th in the world. International schools, the international schools are usually attended by international students. That's I guess when the recruiters come from your colleges and universities, that's where they tend to focus. Very few Singaporeans are enrolled in the school. You need some sort of reason, like you have one foreign parent or something. And there are more than 50 international schools, most of which are very high caliber. There's a Canadian school, there's a couple American schools, several British schools, but even like an Australian, German, several Indian schools that teach the Indian school system. So yeah, the whole gamut. Other considerations for you, and I know when we track our stats of how many Singaporeans are studying in Canada, it gets thrown off because we go by country of origin. But there's a lot of foreign students presently studying in Singapore from the neighboring countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, or even from as far afield as China, India, and South Korea. But they are, of course, are counted under their home country for the purposes of tracking which students are going on to universities in Canada. So let me turn to some of the questions that you guys posed. So the first one was, what are the key sectors for Canadian university engagement with Singapore institutions? So the Canadian universities tend to engage with Singapore institutions across various sectors, including academic collaboration. So that's collaborative research partnership projects and academic partnerships. There's industry collaboration, so where they do collaborative R&D, do internships with industry, and then there's industry tie-ups too. There's also partnerships between the government and NGOs, so initiatives related to education and research. And then there are student exchange programs, so facilitating student mobility between the two countries. I think at least 15 universities have exchange programs with NUS, and then maybe a couple dozen have ones with Nanyang Technological University, which is the other main university, also known as NTU. And then there's Singapore Management University. Those are the three big ones: NUS, NTU, and SMU. And they all have exchange agreements with many Canadian universities. And the government of Canada also has a scholarship program called SEED, some of you might be familiar with. And that's for helping ASEAN students come and study in Canada. And Singapore is in the ASEAN group of nations. So we got to think about 50 last year that went to do an exchange program in Canada. So they get scholarships for that, so long as there are studies related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And lastly, there's also online education platforms that offer online courses and programs to Singaporean learners. That's another way that there's engagement between the two. Speaking of online learning, someone asked about they're interested to hear about online learning in Singapore and if it is of interest to the market. I would say yes. Online learning has gained quite a bit of traction in Singapore, driven by technological advancements and the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. There's considerable interest in the online education market, and that ties back to what I was talking about, the edutech companies, or the Canadian companies that are selling their learning platforms here to enable that online learning. In Singapore, there's several reasons for interest in online learning. Flexibility. Online courses allow students to balance their education with work or other commitments. Access to international programs. So Singaporean learners can access courses from Canadian universities without the need to relocate, broadening their educational opportunities. The skills development, so lifelong learning is encouraged very much highly in Singapore, and online education is seen as a convenient way for older folks to upskill or gain new qualifications. And lastly, digital literacy. So Singaporeans are quite tech savvy, so that makes them receptive to online learning platforms. And because of the primary medium of instruction of education is English, and there's no localization that needs to be done. I mean, even though 70% of Singaporeans are ethnic Chinese and speak Mandarin, they also speak very good English, and that's for the whole across the whole demographic. So Canadian universities who are interested in this can tap into the market by offering, high quality online programs that cater to the needs and preferences of Singaporean learners. Another question we got was, what would attract Singaporean students to study at a Canadian university? What subjects are more popular? So there are several factors that attract Singaporean students to Canada. Of course, is the quality education. Our institutions are known for our high academic standards, and that's recognized globally. So students seek a top-notch education that equips them for future success, and Canada is one way to achieve that. Another one is diversity. Canada's multicultural society appeals to these students, especially Singaporeans. As compared to other parts of the world, the diverse and inclusive environment, fosters sort of like a global perspective and enriches their overall educational experience, but makes them feel at home. And on that note, the state Canada is well known for being safe, and Singapore is one of the lowest crime jurisdictions in the world. So some parents are hesitant to send their kids to the United States, given the issues they have over there with gun control and all that. So Canada is seen as a safer alternative. The post-graduation work opportunities are somewhat of a draw, but Singaporeans, have a good setup here, low tax and high-paying jobs, and so it's not the work permit at the end of study or the PR potential down the road is not as much as a draw as it is for neighboring countries. But it does definitely attract students who maybe want to work for a couple of years abroad before they return home. And our institutions offer popular subjects that are of interest to Singaporean students, like business, engineering, computer science, healthcare-related fields. So another question we got was talk about any trends of students from Singapore studying in Canada. What are the level of studies, interest areas, etc. And I have to say the trends are rather diverse. On the level of studies, Singaporean students pursue both undergraduate and graduate programs in Canada. As I mentioned, the universities here are quite competitive, so it may be that the parents don't want them to go to polytechnics or into the trades, so they may look further afield for their studies, and that would include Canada. So that might mesh well more with their career aspirations and academic interests. Specific areas of interest are, of course, the STEM fields, very popular in Asia in general, but also in Singapore, as well as business. Singapore is a financial center of Asia, so that's often a prominent choice as well, and it aligns with Singapore's economic priorities and the global demand for skilled professionals. As far as origins, students come from various backgrounds, including recent high school graduates who don't want to go into, as I mentioned, the polytechnics or trades. There's also working professionals who are seeking career advancement, and then there's scholarship recipients pursuing advanced degrees. So Singapore has a robust scholarship program. Similar to MyTax, but on steroids. So they'll fund postdoc and PhD studies abroad and domestically, but they encourage their students to look abroad as well. And the only catch is they have to serve a bond when they come back. So let's say they do a postdoc at U of T or whatever, they'll have to come back to Singapore for I think 3 to 5 years to pay off that bond. Another question we got was, would Singaporean students show interest in one semester study abroad exchange programs at Canadian universities? And I think that is quite popular. I mentioned the SEED program, which provides a scholarship for that. And there's other programs too. Some universities have, as I mentioned, have exchange agreements, and some have even like robust exchange programs. U of T and NUS, for example, have an entrepreneurship exchange where the students can go to each other's country, from Singapore to Toronto and back, or vice versa. And what they do is they'll spend a semester or so working at a startup, but also getting 1 credit at school, and so they get that valuable experience. But study abroad exchange in general offers several advantages. You get the cultural exposure. Um, for our students, you get definitely a different culture and educational system that can broaden our students' horizons and enhance their global perspective. But the same for the Singaporeans, coming to live and work in Canada during that one semester. You get international exposure, and that kind of experience is highly valued by employers because, especially the multinational employers here in Singapore, they like to see that sort of experience that you've gotten from not just maybe having studied from 7 years old all the way through to university here and just in Singapore. And then, academic enrichment. The studying at a Canadian institution for a semester could allow these students to get access to specialized courses or research opportunities that might not be available in their home country. Some fields, Canada's a world leader in, like AI, quantum, but even things like, agriculture and food tech and areas like that, that are not available here in Singapore because they have no farming, and that's something we specialize in. So Canadian universities can market these programs as a valuable addition to a student's academic journey. Another question was about market educational pathway trends, so economic outlook, population trends, etc. So on economic outlook, so Singapore has a robust and stable economy, and it's positioned itself as a global financial and business hub. This economic strength, it translates into substantial resources available for investment into education. The government consistently allocates a significant portion of national budget to education. It wants to emphasize its importance in sustaining the nation's competitiveness. It has no natural resources, as mentioned. There's no agriculture. There's nothing. There's less and less manufacturing here. So the one key asset is their people, and so they invest heavily in the knowledge economy and equipping their citizens and their students with the tools to succeed. Population trends. Singapore's demographic mix is probably best characterized by having a significant youth population. So the youthful demographic creates a strong demand for education services. All the way from early childhood education to higher education. There's no shortage of tutoring services available. Interestingly enough, it's a very meritocratic-based system. So there's when the students are 12 years old, they take a national exam, which helps to sort of stream them into what areas of study they're going to do in secondary school and how and ultimately in post-secondary. So that's very competitive, and that there's a lot of there's the whole industry of tuition and of learning platforms and educational online learning or in-person learning to help them prepare for that exam. There's also skills-based learning. So not everybody can go to university. So Singapore places a growing emphasis on skills development, but they work hand in hand with industry to upskill the workforce. So they'll get problem statements or challenges that the industry is trying to fulfill, and align their program offerings with those trends, and get practical job-ready education. Another question was, is Singapore a good market to explore for the K-12 sector? So I would say yes, Singapore's K-12 sector, it's known for its competitive environment and high educational standards. As I mentioned, it ranks really well in the PISA assessments. So that would make it an attractive market for Canadian institutions who are seeking to expand your presence. Some of the factors are, educational excellence. Singapore's reputation for academic excellence draws families from across the region who prioritize their children's education. Canadian institutions can offer diverse teaching methodologies and curricula, providing an alternative to the local education system. And as we've seen some of the international or some of the private schools here pick up Canadian curriculum that they offer alongside IB to differentiate themselves in the field. There's a global perspective, of course. Canadian K-12 institutions can introduce a global perspective into students' education. And the example is the Canadian International School here in Singapore. And then there's also the holistic education. So, as in Canada, we offer an education that goes beyond academics, including character development, arts, sports, extracurricular activities. So that's another way you can differentiate yourself. And then what are the opportunities for Canadian private institutions based on the current market update? So Canadian private institutions can explore several opportunities in the Singaporean market. You could offer specialized programs, so like developing niche programs or specializations that cater to specific industry needs or emerging fields can attract students seeking unique educational experiences and career prospects. You could also collaborate with local institutions. Partnering with local Singaporean institutions, including private schools and universities, can help facilitate program delivery and provide a pathway for students to earn Canadian qualifications. There's even standalone folks like Kaplan and whatnot that can help you deliver your content. And then finally, focusing on niche markets. So identifying and serving niche markets as adult learners or professionals seeking continuing education or EMBAs, things like that. That can be a strategic approach. If Canadian institutions want to tap that market, that you can offer flexible learning options, including online courses, to help accommodate the needs of the Singaporean learners. And the last question we had was the private college and post-secondary enrollment rate. I mean, the rate varies, but it remains pretty significant. Post-secondary institutions play a vital role in the landscape by offering alternative pathways to traditional universities. I guess there's several factors that contribute to the importance or the significance of these private colleges and institutions. So some of them I mentioned before: diversity, educational needs, alternative pathways for students who have taken non-traditional routes and maybe want to change careers later in life, and then accessibility is, I think, probably the biggest one. Is private institutions offer more flexible admission criteria, making education accessible to a wider range of students, including those who might not meet the stringent entry requirements of public universities, but still want to pursue higher learning. So that those are all different factors that would impact the decision of whether to pursue partnerships with institutions like these, or broaden your reach and try to offer a wider array of educational opportunities to Singaporean learners. I think that's all the questions we had. Kate, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Dan, for all the information. I was wondering maybe if you can share some notes with us or some links to the programs you mentioned. I think that would be helpful for people who are joining, so that because I feel like it's a lot of content. So when I send out the follow-up email, I'll make sure that we get those information to people who came to the webinar today. So I guess just see if anyone has any live questions or anything that you would like to ask Dan. Please feel free to do so. I also have a couple more questions. While we wait, do you think we can just touch base on those while we wait?
Sure, I'm happy to try to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you. So I'll post them. It's also from people who registered for this webinar, and I'll put it in the chat so we can see that here. I'm curious about possible synergies between institutions such as 2+2 transfer agreements.
Yeah,
articulation
that's
program. Yeah.
there's a half dozen polytechnics in Singapore. So as I mentioned, it's a British system. So if you don't go do your A levels to go to university, you can do your O levels and go to polytechnics. And they're typically 3-year programs. But there are several Canadian institutions that will work with these polytechnics or look at students coming from the polys. And if you do 2 years there and then 2 years in Canada, then you can get your degree. But it's all the obstacle is on the Canadian side. There's not a huge demand for curriculum mapping with Singaporean institutions, just because the familiarity is not there. Even though it's a robust education system here, I think if your institution invested some time into exploring the possibility of curriculum mapping or giving credit for the poly studies here in Singapore, then that will go a long way. Australian universities do offer credit for Singaporean polytechnic degrees or for the studying at a Singapore poly, and so they have a leg up on you guys, not just because of their proximity and because who doesn't want to live in Australia, but but also because they give that advanced credit, so you don't have to redo what you studied in Singapore to go on to Canada.
Great. That's helpful. And another one here is
No, can't hear you, sir.
sorry, I was on mute. No, I was saying that thank you for answering that question. Another one I have here is any incentives for exchange students or study abroad programs by the Singapore government or higher education institutions there.
Yeah, so Canada offers the SEED program, as I mentioned, if you're
Yeah.
studying related to the UN SDGs, and then there's we also have I think is the Banting postdoc fellowship that is open to foreign students as well if you're going to do a postdoc. On the Singaporean side, the Agency for Science, Technology, and Research does have a robust study abroad program. As I mentioned, for PhDs and for postdocs, they'll have to serve a bond when they come back, but they will fund their study and quite substantially too. So there's a lot of money available for Singaporean students who do want to study abroad from the government of Singapore itself.
The last one I have here is what are the most popular outgoing destinations and what experiences are students looking for in Singapore?
Outgoing destination, you mean outbound from Singapore?
Yeah.
Yeah, so number one is Australia, just because of the proximity. Parents feel safe because it's only a 3-hour maximum time difference. Perth is 4-hour flight away. Sydney and Melbourne are 7 to 8 hours. So that's probably the closest you can get, but still get a quality education system. And to be frank, the Australian institutions are on par with some of ours, and economy is quite similar. So it's a great opportunity. And they're quite active recruiting here. They even have, some of them even have like Singaporean campuses. So it's quite well integrated. And then because of the British system, school system, the UK remains a very popular choice, a second choice actually. So even though it's quite far, the historical colonial ties and the way the system is set up to mesh well with the English system or the British system means that the UK is also a popular destination. If you are looking in North America, some parents can be very brand conscious, especially wealthy parents. So the Ivy Leagues are always difficult to compete with for any university. But we're trying to increase the awareness of Canada and experiences that we have here. I think if we stress, like the subject areas, like I mentioned, like quantum, like AI, things like that, where we are world leaders, then that can help overcome that and help draw students to Canada. The safety I mentioned before is always is a good selling point. The natural beauty of Canada, and of course its location in North America. You can easily get down to the U.S. or Mexico or whatnot.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I guess if we don't have any live questions here, you can always send either your questions to us so we can forward them to Dan, or we will also share Dan's contact information so that you can get in touch with him if you have any questions regarding collaborations and programs in Singapore. So I guess we will end our webinar here today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I also want to remind everyone that we'll have a survey pops up when you log out. So please complete the survey so we know about your feedbacks. And also, I'm going to actually put in the chat the event list with BCCIE. We do have some upcoming events, webinars, courses planned. So it'd be great if you can take a look. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. Again, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening or great day.